Hello there, Mr. Wilson here again for another episode of How Do I Help My Child With? And in this episode, we're going to look at multiplying whole numbers. Now, out of all the videos that I've made so far, this is probably one of the most, if not the most important topic, because multiplying whole numbers is an essential skill that is used in so many different topics. And to be able to have a method to be able to multiply numbers without a calculator is essential for any level of mathematics. Now, there are loads of methods for multiplying whole numbers. In fact, if you Google methods for multiplying whole numbers, you'll come across the short and long column multiplications. You should come across the grid method or the area model, lattice method, Chinese crossing method. There are loads and loads of different ways of multiplying whole numbers, and when you get to an even higher level of mathematics, there are algorithms and all sorts of other stuff that will multiply numbers. However, I'm just going to focus on three methods. Now, the one method that your child will be familiar with from primary school is known as the short column method. Now, there is a slightly different version called the long column method, which is slightly longer in how it's set out. It actually goes longer on the page, and it takes slightly longer in terms of time. But they both essentially do the same thing. The method, however, that I recommend is the area model, or the grid method as it's known. The reason for this is because this method can also be used for expanding brackets, which is a topic in the GCSE maths. And so this one method, if you are an expert of using it with numbers, can then be applied to expanding brackets in algebra. So it's one method for two different topics, rather than having to know two different methods for two different topics. You've kind of got one thing. It's like killing two birds with one stone almost. Now, I've always used this method. That's the way I was taught, and the method you might have been taught at school might be different to the method that your child uses. But I don't want to discourage students who are really good at the short column method, for example, to not use it because it's not the way that I would do it. Because realistically, all three of these methods are on the national curriculum, and so is, in some ways, the lattice method if a student wants to use that method. So, what I've decided to do, unusually, is because I only focus on one method, I'm going to actually go through all three methods in this video. So, if you look in the description of this video, I should have, if I've done the job right, put a time to when I talk about each method. So if you're looking for a particular method, then look in the description and there should be a time that will tell you, what time each method is discussed at, or you can watch the whole video if you want a discussion of all three. So I've got the same question three times. Okay, what is 32 times 23? And I'm going to work them all out. We'll work out the same question using three different methods. So, in this first question, let's discuss the method that will probably be most familiar to your child from primary school, which is known as the short column method. Now, the short column method is a way of representing it as a column. So if you've seen my addition and subtraction videos, you'll be very, very familiar with that idea. And it's short because you do a little bit of exchanging within the sort of working out. I'll explain that in a second. So first job is obviously to set it out as a column, like this. And then we draw those lines like that. So now we just need to work from right to left. But with multiplication, it's a little bit trickier than addition or subtraction because every digit has to be multiplied by every other digit, which is how multiplication works. When you have two numbers like this, every digit in each number has to be multiplied with each other. So, first job then is to perform, I'm going to use my highlighters actually, is to perform the calculation 2 times 3. Because remember, we always work right to left. So 2 times 3 is 6. Seems pretty easy. And now we need to do 3 times 3 because I need to multiply every digit with every other digit. So 2 times 3 is 6. And then I need to now multiply these two digits together. And 3 times 3 is 9, so the 9 is going to go there. That was pretty easy. And then I need to do the same thing, but for this digit. Now, when I do this, 2 times 2, the answer is 4, obviously, but I'm not going to write 4 here. I'm going to write a 4 here because this 2 is not actually 2, it's 20. 20, it's actually worth 20 because it's in the tens column. In our first calculation, 2 times 3, both of these were in the ones, so 2 times 3 is 6, but what this actually is, this green calculation here, is it's actually 20 times 2, which is 40. So you can actually put a 0 there if you'd like, to make sure you remember that it's 40. And then the other two we multiply together, 20 times 30, 2 times 3 is 6, but 20 times 30 is 600, so the 6 would go there in the hundreds column. So now we have these two answers. So this is 96 comes from doing 3 times 2, which is 6, 3 times what's basically 30, which is 90, that's why it's 96. And then here we've got 20 times 2 is 40, 20 times 30 is 600. And then we just add these together because we've multiplied every number with every other number, so we need to add it all up. So we get 6 plus 0 is 6, 9 plus 4 is 13, so 3 exchange the 1. See my column addition videos for that. 1 plus 6 is 7. So the correct answer is 736 for this calculation. And again, if you were multiplying, I don't know, a 3-digit number by a 3-digit number, you'd have to have more rows here in order to accommodate more numbers because you multiply more digits with other digits. But in this example, we only have 2 rows and then we add these together to get our final answer. So we know the answer is 736. So how does this compare to the next method then? So, well, same calculation. So we know what the answer is going to be, but this time we're going to use the long multiplication method. And then I'll talk about why I think I don't like short multiplication method, in my opinion. Well, I'll talk about maybe some negatives about that method and why I personally don't use it. Anyway, the short multiplication method, long multiplication method, same idea, same setup because it's still column. So long column multiplication method is maybe the better way of writing it, times 23. Now, what we're actually going to do in this example is instead of trying to write it in just 2 lines, every time we work something out, it's going to be a separate line. So here, 2 times 3 is 6, so same idea, we still work going from right to left. So 2 times 3 is 6. 30, which is what that number is, times 3 is 90. But instead of writing it here, I'm going to write it on a separate line. So I'm going to write 90 here. And then I'm going to do 20 times 2, which is 40. So I'm going to write 40 here on a separate line. And then finally you get 20 times 30, which is 600, and write that on a separate line. So as you can see, it's noticeably longer because every time you work something out, you write it on a separate line. But the actual calculations are exactly the same. You're still working out the same calculations, pretty much in the same order. It's just that each time you write it on a separate line. And then again, you just add these together. So 6 plus all those zeros is 6. 9 plus 4 is 13. You have the 1. 736, which we know is the correct answer. Now, I quite like the long column multiplication method because it does something that I think is a huge negative with the short column multiplication method. The reason why this method can sometimes lead to a lot of mistakes is because a lot of students forget that this 2 is not worth 2, it's worth 20. So they forget the 0 in the 40 because they forget that it's actually worth 20. Now again, you could say, oh well, again you could say that 2 times 2 is 4, but I found personally through experience that a lot more students tend to remember that this is worth 40 because they're writing it on separate lines. It doesn't get sort of all bunched together. So for me, anyway, I much prefer writing each line out separately. I mean, it takes 10 seconds longer. And I know a lot of students will say, oh, it takes too long, but students are far less likely to make mistakes when they actually write out every single value rather than trying to bunch it all up together like this and try and do multiple steps in one go. Um, I've, and this is just through experience. And again, if your child is an expert on short column method, then absolutely let them run with it. I'm just putting out there, maybe if the short column method is not working for your child, where those mistakes might be happening, and maybe it might be time to maybe just try a different method and see if it works best for them. The best thing about maths is it's not a one size fits all in some cases, and I think if there are multiple ways of getting to the same answer and they're valid methods, then I'm more than happy to see a child have a go at that method if they're confident with it. So if this method is not working or your child is making a lot of mistakes, it could be because they're trying to do too much working out in sort of one step rather than trying to set it out like long column multiplication does. And this actually leads me on nicely to my favourite method, the grid method, because it takes a sort of um, idea from long column multiplication and sort of sets it out even nicer. So the final method we're going to have a look at then is known as the area model, also known as the grid method. Now, how does this method work? Well, you separate these numbers into their individual parts. So we've got 30 and 2 times 20 and 3. Now, obviously, this will be a lot easier to do on graph paper, squared paper, but I don't have that, so I'm just sort of trying to set it out best I can. And you draw yourself in a grid like this. Now, the reason why I love this method so much is there is no confusion now about what this 3 is worth. Like I said, in column, it's really easy to just do 2 times 2 is 4 and forget that that 2 is worth 20. Or it's really easy to forget that 3 times 2 is 6, but actually that is 30 and that is 20, so it's going to be 600. I think it's really easy to make that mistake, whereas there tends to be none of that in area model, because now you've broken down the number into its parts, you can clearly see that that's not worth 3, it's worth 30. So now we just need to multiply each of the values with each other, and that's why we've got the grid to set it out. So this box here is going to be the answer of 30 times 20, which is 600, because 3 times 2 is 6, and then times by 10 times by 10 to get you 600. 30 times 3 is 90, 20 times 2 is 40, 3 times 2 is 6. So you get the exact same values as what you do from long column multiplication, just set out in a grid. And then you just have to add up all the values that you've just worked out, and you can use whatever method you want for that. So you can set it out as a column, and then we get the answer that we've got twice before, 736. Now, it seems like I was very negative on the short column multiplication method. And again, I'd just like to repeat, if your child, that is the method that they're good at, let them use that method. And if they're confident with that method, let them use it. I think what I'm trying to sort of suggest by this video is that there are loads of different ways to multiply numbers. And when you start realizing there are different ways of doing it, for me, I saw the grid method, and yeah, it takes a little bit longer, I would say, than short column, but I have made far less mistakes multiplying numbers using the grid method than I ever have done using short column, because the grid method allows you to break down the numbers into smaller parts. That's why it's my preferred method. But for a lot of students out there, they look at that and think, oh, that's easy to me, and that's their preferred method, and that's absolutely fantastic. So here are just 3 methods that hopefully should be sort of circulating around sort of education at the moment, and that your child may or may not be familiar with all of them or just some of them, but I would highly recommend, if a method is not working for your child, let them try a different one. Now that you've seen this video and you know of a couple of different other methods, why not help them out with one? Why not show them how to do a different method? Maybe they might open up to a new method that they've never seen before but really clicks with them. Maybe their teacher has taught them grid and it doesn't really work for them and they'd much prefer long multiplication. And like I said, there are many, many other methods out there. So many, in fact, that it would be an hour's video in itself just to explain all those methods like lattice and Chinese crossing and all these other methods that are genuinely amazing when you look into how they work and why they produce the correct answer. But yeah, like I said, it seems like a lot of hate on short column, but I do quite like it. It's not the method that I use anymore. I used to, but I don't anymore. If you have any questions on anything that I've talked about in this video, then please let me know. If there's a method that your child is using that I haven't talked about here, and you'd like to know how it works because you don't understand it, drop a comment. I can always make another video on even more methods if that's what's necessary. If they're an expert on lattice but you don't know how lattice method works and you want to help them, then let me know. But all I want to say is thank you so much for watching and hope you have a fantastic day.